Hello everybody, welcome to week 7 and a brand new kind of story time. So thank you for enjoying the one and only Ivan with me. I loved it. Keep in mind the spin-off, the one and only Bob, is coming out there, so maybe you can find that somewhere, either the book or the movie. I'm happy to report that we are shifting from chapter books to incredible picture books, and we're going to take a look for the next few weeks at Patricia Polacco. And I know many of you know who Patricia Polacco is. Everyone in my 2 classes know the Patricia Polacco books. So we're going to take one Patricia Polacco book a week and look more deeply at the central message and practice that focused skill that we're working on right now, which is identifying the central message. So I want to start by introducing Patricia Polacco to you just a little bit, telling about her and her life. And then I want to share with you the first installment of our reading of this book called Mr. Lincoln's Way. So Patricia Polacco is an incredibly prolific author-illustrator. Prolific means someone who has created a lot of work. A prolific artist would be someone who has painted a lot of pictures or made a lot of sculptures. A prolific author is someone who's written a lot of books. And one of the things I think that's most curious about Patricia Polacco, she's now, I think, written about 115 books, she said, recently in an interview that I watched. And she only started writing books after she was 41 years old, which might seem really old to you, but it's interesting to know that she's, been writing for 27 years, and she didn't start writing until she was 41. So it's kind of like that, that quote at the beginning of Ivan, "It's never too late to be what you might have been," I think is what it was. That makes me think back to that quote. So also very interesting about Patricia Polacco is that she actually has some learning struggles. In fact, there are 3 different learning struggles that she has. And even so, she is an incredibly brilliant author and illustrator. She learned to read very late because of the way that the words went into her brain. They didn't make a lot of sense to her until she was older, so she didn't learn how to read until she was 14. She also had difficulty with math, and she had difficulty with organizing her handwriting. So it's pretty amazing that she was able to persevere through those challenges and become such an amazing author-illustrator. You might have heard of Rashinka's Eggs. You might have heard of Chicken Sunday. You might have heard of Mrs. Katz and Tush. There are so many Patricia Polacco books to enjoy. So I am excited to share this first dip in and this first exploration with you. We're gonna take 3 days and we're gonna keep our focus on the central message. This book in particular has maybe more than one central message. It has some pretty deep meaning, and Patricia Polacco books generally do. What's especially amazing about her is that she knows that kids have complex lives. And she knows that in kids' lives, sometimes things are hard or difficult or confusing. And she writes stories with that in mind. She writes stories that honor the complexity of children's lives and give them the vocabulary and the reflection through the characters to try to understand and make sense of the challenging things that sometimes happen in our lives. This story takes place at school, as you can see, and it's about a principal, Mr. Lincoln, and about one of his students. And you might have heard some people in your life, or maybe from somewhere else, you might have heard some people who make negative decisions about another group of people just for who they are. Have you ever heard that before, where someone says, "They're not my kind," or "I'm not like them," or "You are not as good as this group or that group"? Yeah, it happens sometimes, and And it really takes some opening of our hearts and our minds to challenge those kinds of things when they show up in our lives. If you've ever heard someone put down another group of people because they are different, then this story will, I think, have a connection for you. All right, we're gonna start Mr. Lincoln's Way. I have to turn this a little bit. Mr. Lincoln was the coolest principal in the whole world, or so his students thought. He had the coolest clothes, had the coolest smile, and did the coolest things. He had tea parties with Mrs. West's kindergarten every spring. He took Mr. Bliss's sixth graders on nature walks in the fall. And he set up his telescope next to the pond in the back of the school on special nights and invited kids and their families to come and look at the stars. And in the winter, he was Santa for the Christmas play. He lit the menorah for Hanukkah, and he wore a dashiki for Kwanzaa and a burnous for Ramadan. Mr. Lincoln was just plain cool. Absolutely everybody thought so, except for Eugene Esterhaus. Mean Gene is what everybody called him. Mean Gene sassed the teachers and beat up on most of the other kids on the playground. He was no student at all. He drove Mrs. Dunkel crazy in English, and Miss Chu wanted to drop him from art, and he was a bully. He always seemed angry, picking on kids and calling them names. "He's not a bad boy, really," Mr. Lincoln said, "only troubled." To just about everybody in school, though, Eugene was trouble, spelled with a capital T. Then one day, he leered at a first grader. "What are you looking at, scumball?" he said, and he pushed her down and wrenched her backpack away. "I'm gonna tell Mr. Lincoln," she announced. "Go ahead, you little brat. I ain't afraid of that." Then he stopped. Mr. Lincoln was standing right there. The bell rang and Eugene scurried away. Now Eugene was in Mr. Lincoln's thoughts more than ever. He knew he had to find a way to reach him. Then one day, as Mr. Lincoln was helping a fifth grade plant a tree in the beautiful new atrium, he noticed that Eugene was looking up into the branches of one of the other trees. There sat a bright red cardinal. 2 other days, Mr. Lincoln had seen Eugene standing at the atrium window watching the birds on the trees. Mr. Lincoln wondered, was it possible that... It wasn't a day later when Mr. Lincoln called Eugene to his office. Eugene slumped into a chair. Mr. Lincoln took a beautiful book out of his desk drawer. The book in blazing color was all about birds. He turned to one page and studied the illustration. "I've got these little birds all over my tree, and I don't know what they are." Eugene got out of his chair and walked over. "Those are red-capped nuthatches. Weird to see them at this time of year." "You seem to know your birds," Mr. Lincoln said with a warm smile. "I do. When I lived on Grandpa's farm, he had tons of birds around. Chicken, thrashers, meadowlarks. We raised carrier pigeons together." "You've got quite a grandpa," Mr. Lincoln said. But Eugene just turned his back on Mr. Lincoln and left the room. We're going to pause right there, friends, and pick up with the next third of our story the next time we meet. So far we know a little bit about their main characters. We know that Eugene is a pretty troubled kid. He's showing some hurt through his actions and his words. And it shows that Mr. Lincoln is trying to find a way to reach in and see if he can connect with Eugene, or Mean Gene. Okay, I'll see you next time.